Before I begin this story, here's a little taste to pull you in. I thought I was just babysitting my grandson for the weekend. A few cartoons, some juice boxes, maybe a walk to the park. But what he said to me that quiet Sunday morning, well, I still carry it with me every single day. It was simple, unexpected, and so deeply felt that it changed how I saw myself, not just as a grandmother, but as a woman, as a human being. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. Now, let's go back a little. It was the second week of October, and the leaves were starting to turn that crisp amber and burnt orange along our street in rural Pennsylvania. I remember the light that morning, soft, golden, coming through the kitchen window like honey. My house smelled of cinnamon and warm apples from a slow cooker bubbling away on the counter. The kind of smell that makes you feel like everything might be okay after all. I hadn't seen much of my daughter lately. She's got 3 kids and a job that keeps her up nights, so when she asked if I could take little Mason for the weekend, I said yes without thinking twice. He was 6 then, all elbows and questions, and that wild calic that refused to lay flat. Saturday went by in a blur of Legos, peanut butter sandwiches, and me pretending I knew how to play Mario Kart. I fell asleep that night on the couch, a soft throw blanket over my legs. Mason snuggled beside me with his little head on my arm. His tiny snores were the sweetest background music. But it was Sunday morning that settled deep into me. I woke early. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and everything outside was painted in that bluish-gray hush only found at dawn. I tiptoed to the kitchen, hoping to get the coffee going before Mason woke. I stood at the sink, holding my mug with both hands, staring out at the dew clinging to the backyard grass. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you think too much. And then I heard the patter of bare feet. Mason shuffled in, rubbing his eyes, hair a complete mess, still in his space-themed pajamas. He climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs without a word and just watched me. I smiled at him, gave him his favorite cup with the dinosaur on it, filled with warm milk. He took it and held it in both hands like it was a treasure. We sat there for a while, not saying much. Just the ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional bird song outside. I thought he was still half asleep. But then he looked up at me with those wide hazel eyes and said something I didn't expect. "Grandma," he began, very serious, "how come you don't smile like the other grandmas?" I blinked. "What do you mean, honey?" "You smile with your mouth," he said, tilting his head like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. "But not your eyes. You look like you forgot to be happy." I just stared at him. That moment hung in the air between us like mist. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. I'd never told him or anyone really how I'd been feeling lately. That ever since my divorce 5 years ago, something had gone quiet inside me. I filled my days with chores, helping out with the grandkids, volunteering at the library. Smiles were easy to give, but somewhere in the quiet corners of the night, I wondered where I'd gone. And now this little boy, this beautiful, sharp, open-hearted child, had seen it, named it, just like that. I forced a smile, the real kind this time, and reached out to squeeze his hand. "You know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think I forgot how to smile with my eyes. But maybe you can help me remember." He nodded like I just told him he was getting ice cream for breakfast. "Okay," he said. "I can do that." Then he hopped down and went to the living room, humming to himself as if he hadn't just touched something deep inside me. I stood in the kitchen, blinking back tears, the kind that come out of nowhere but carry a weight you didn't even know you'd been carrying. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I leaned against the counter and let that moment settle into my bones. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music swelling in the background, no grand realization with a flash of light. Just quiet, deep, true. And somehow I knew something had shifted. I'd tell you more, but we're just getting started. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. Now, let's go back a little. It was early October, one of those Saturdays where the whole world felt like it had taken a deep breath. Leaves were crunching underfoot, the sky was that clear, pale blue you only get in autumn, and the scent of wood smoke lingered in the distance like a memory. I just pulled out my cozy flannel robe and the wool socks my sister gave me last Christmas. The kind of morning that made you want to bake something, even if you didn't have anyone to eat it with. My daughter called the night before, sounding frazzled. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you watch Mason for the weekend? Jake's got a fever, and we don't want Mason catching whatever it is." Of course I said yes. Mason was my youngest grandson, and we'd always had a quiet connection. Not the noisy, bouncing off the walls type of bond you see in cartoons, but a real one. Like we just got each other. He arrived just before lunchtime, backpack slung over one shoulder, dragging a stuffed tiger by the arm. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Grandma," he shouted, wrapping his arms around my waist. I bent down to hug him, breathing in that familiar scent of crayons, apple shampoo, and whatever little boys get into. We spent most of the day building Lego towers and baking oatmeal cookies, though I'll be honest, he did most of the eating and I did most of the cleaning. After dinner, we curled up on the couch with a blanket, watching one of those animated movies I never understand, but always enjoy because his laugh is better than anything the scriptwriters come up with. That night, he fell asleep against me, his hand loosely holding one of my fingers like it was an anchor. I didn't move for a long time. My arm was numb, but my heart was full in that quiet, aching kind of way that sneaks up on you in the stillness. And then came Sunday morning. I woke early. Habit, I suppose. Years of early shifts, early kids, early everything. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. I tiptoed into the kitchen, trying not to wake him. The sky was still holding on to the last bit of night, but a soft light was beginning to creep across the backyard. I wrapped my hands around my mug and stood by the window, watching dew sparkle on the grass. The maple tree out back looked like it had been set on fire with all those glowing leaves. The world felt wrapped in a kind of gentle hush. Then I heard the shuffle of small feet on hardwood. I turned, and there he was, hair pointing in 5 directions, pajama top halfway buttoned, one sock missing. "Mornin', sleepyhead," I whispered. He didn't answer right away, just padded over to the table and sat down, rubbing his eyes. I poured him some warm milk in the blue mug with the stegosaurus on it, his favorite, and set it in front of him. We sat like that for a few minutes. No TV, no talking. Just the sound of the old house waking up. He took a sip and looked up at me with that expression kids get when they're about to say something too big for their little bodies. "Grandma," he said, "how come you don't smile like the other grandmas?" It hit me like cold water. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He tilted his head, his brow furrowing the way his mother's used to when she was his age. "You smile with your mouth," he said matter-of-factly, "but your eyes look sad. you look like you forgot how to be happy." I stared at him. This small, serious boy sitting in his rocket ship pajamas, delivering a truth I hadn't spoken aloud to anyone, not even myself. It had been years since my divorce, years of doing what needed to be done, keeping the house up, helping with the kids, volunteering at church, smiling when people asked how I was. And I had smiled, hadn't I? But Mason saw through all of it. Not because he meant to be deep or wise. He was just telling me what he saw. Simply, clearly, and without judgment. I reached over and took his tiny hand in mine. "Maybe I did forget," I said softly. "But maybe you can help me remember." He gave me the smallest, gentlest smile. "Okay." And just like that, he jumped down and ran off to look for his toy truck, as if he hadn't just cracked my heart open and let in the light. I stood in that kitchen, one hand still warm from his, and I realized something had shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough that I felt it deep in my chest. Something about the way he saw me, saw through me, made me want to find whatever part of myself I'd tucked away. And that was only the beginning. That Sunday afternoon, after Mason's quiet little truth had settled in my chest like a stone dropped into a pond, I found myself watching him more closely. Not in the worried, hovering way, just observing him the way you do when someone's reminded you what really matters. He was on the floor in the living room, surrounded by a sea of wooden train tracks and tiny cars that kept getting stuck in plastic tunnels. Every so often, he'd make a sound effect, little explosions, screeching brakes, giggles that came from somewhere deep in his belly. And I just sat in the recliner, holding a warm mug of tea, watching the light catch his hair as it filtered through the lace curtains. It had been a long time since I'd really seen someone like that. The old photo albums sat on the bookshelf nearby, and I suddenly got the urge to open one. I hadn't touched them in years, too many memories, too much of him inside those pages. But something about the way Mason looked at the world so openly made me feel braver than I usually did. "Hey, kiddo," I said, "want to see what your mom looked like when she was your age?" His head popped up, eyes wide. "Like me?" "Very much like you," I smiled. We sat cross-legged on the rug together, the album spread open between us. I flipped through pages filled with sun-faded snapshots, Halloween costumes from the 90s, first day of kindergarten photos, birthday parties where I always looked tired but tried my best to smile. Mason pointed at one picture. "Is that you, Grandma?" It was me, sitting on a picnic blanket, holding my daughter on my lap. I must have been 33, maybe 34. My hair was still long then, and there was something wild in my eyes, like I hadn't yet been worn down by disappointments, like life still had time to surprise me. I nodded. "That was me. A long time ago." "You look happy," he said, without lifting his gaze. I swallowed hard. I was. That was a good day. He kept flipping. Every now and then, he'd ask questions. "Who's that? Why were you wearing that hat? Did Mom really eat that much cake?" His curiosity was sweet, but it also stirred up things I hadn't thought about in years. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd left behind in those albums. Not just the images, but the feeling of being alive in them. At one point, he stopped on a page and looked up at me. "Grandma, did you used to laugh a lot?" I felt something in my throat tighten. "Yes, I did." He nodded as if that answered a very big question. Then he leaned his little body against mine, warm and weighty and familiar. I wrapped my arm around him, resting my cheek on the top of his messy hair. "You can laugh again," he mumbled, barely audible. You just need someone to remind you how. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But I sat there, holding him, and let the silence say everything. Outside, the sun had started to lower, painting the backyard in long shadows. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and I felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in a long, long while. Later, after dinner and bath time, I tucked him into the guest bed. He clutched his stuffed tiger, blinking up at me. "Will you stay with me until I fall asleep?" "Of course, sweetheart." I sat beside him, brushing his hair back gently with my fingers, like I used to do with my own kids. His breathing slowed, and I could tell he was drifting. But right before he fell asleep, he whispered, "I think you're starting to smile with your eyes now." It hit me so softly I almost missed it. I didn't cry, not then, but something about that moment clung to me, like a note still ringing long after the music stopped. After he drifted off, I tiptoed back downstairs and stood in front of the hallway mirror. The house was dark except for the small lamp near the stairs. I looked at myself, noticing the fine lines, the soft curve of my jaw, the weariness that clung to the corners of my mouth, but also something else, something I couldn't name yet. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't turn away. I stood there, breathing, really looking. Maybe Mason was right. Maybe I could learn to smile with my eyes again. The thought didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt like the beginning of something. And I wasn't as afraid of beginnings as I used to be. Monday morning came with that familiar heaviness, the kind you don't quite name out loud, but feel in your shoulders, in your steps, in the way you move through the rooms. The air was still scented with faint traces of syrup from Sunday breakfast, and one of Mason's socks was still tucked between the couch cushions. I held it for a moment, smiling to myself, before folding it and tucking it into the drawer where I kept little things the grandkids forgot. I've never been one to say that kids are wiser than we are. Life teaches you things experience can't, but sometimes they see us clearer than we see ourselves. That weekend with Mason had stirred something inside me. Something I thought had long been packed away with the old holiday decorations and wedding china I no longer used. But what do you do when a 6-year-old wakes something up in you that you thought was gone? I didn't have the answer, so I did what I always do. I kept moving. Laundry, dishes, a grocery run where I forgot half the things on my list. But everything I touched seemed to hold more weight. I found myself staring at the apples longer, noticing the color variations, the little imperfections. I paid attention to the cashier's hands as she scanned each item, wondering what her life looked like when she left the store. That afternoon, I finally did something I'd been avoiding for over a year. I went into the spare room, the one I used to call my craft space, though the only thing I'd been crafting lately was excuses not to go in there. Dust coated the windowsill, and the sewing machine was still covered with the floral fabric I'd intended to turn into curtains, back when I thought I might enjoy sewing again. The light from the window poured in soft and golden, catching on the tiny threads and paper scraps still left on the desk. I opened the top drawer, slowly, like it might bite me. Inside were old photos I hadn't gotten around to framing, buttons from Mason's old jackets, and a stack of notebooks I used to jot things down in. Stories, recipes, dreams. One caught my eye. A small, spiral-bound book with a faded cover. I opened it, flipping through the pages, and there it was, in my own handwriting, a list titled Things I Still Want. I'd written it 4 years ago, a few months after the divorce. The top of the list read, "To laugh so hard I cry. To walk barefoot in the ocean again. To dance without feeling foolish. to be seen, to feel proud of something that's just mine. I pressed my hand to the page, not sure whether to laugh or cry. I hadn't thought about that list in years. Honestly, I hadn't believed any of it was still possible. But Mason's words kept echoing in my mind. You just need someone to remind you how. Maybe I needed to be that someone. Maybe waiting for someone else to bring it out of me wasn't the answer anymore. So I made a small promise to myself. One thing. Just one small thing from that list. That night, I put on music. Not the radio. Real music. The kind that used to live in my bones. I poured a glass of wine, took off my shoes, and let the songs carry me back to a time when I moved without hesitation. The first few minutes felt awkward. I hadn't danced in years. My knees creaked, my back complained, but my heart, oh, it remembered. My hands found rhythm, my body found breath, and before I knew it, I was laughing. Not out loud at first, just a small laugh, tucked in the corner of my mouth. But then it grew, bubbling up until I was laughing in the middle of my kitchen, one sock on, music playing, arms in the air, like I had nothing to prove to anyone. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror again, brushing my teeth. The same reflection, the same tired eyes. But this time, something else was there too, something brighter. A flicker. The phone rang. It was my daughter. "Mason told me you danced last night," she said, chuckling. I paused, toothbrush in hand. "Oh, did he now?" "Yep." He said, "Grandma turned on the music and danced like nobody was watching. I think her eyes were smiling again." I had to sit down on the edge of the tub just to take it in. It's funny how life gives you exactly what you need, wrapped in the most unexpected package. I thought I was the one doing the favor, babysitting, being helpful, showing up like I always did. But really it was Mason showing up for me. He didn't know it, of course. He was just being 6. But that weekend, in between the cookies and cartoons, he opened a window inside me I'd kept locked shut. And I was finally starting to breathe again. It's strange how change doesn't always come crashing in like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it tiptoes in on little feet, wearing spaceship pajamas and holding a plastic dinosaur. A week had passed since Mason's visit, but his words stayed with me like a favorite song I couldn't quite stop humming. I went about my days, running errands, folding laundry, stirring soup on the stove, but something in me had shifted. A softness, a little more light. I caught myself smiling more, even when no one was around to see it. That Friday, I decided to go for a walk along the creek trail near town. I hadn't been down there in over a year. It used to be one of my favorite places, back when I still believed in doing things just for myself. The path was quiet, just the sound of leaves underfoot, and the occasional chirp of a bird settling in for autumn. The air had that crisp snap to it, like the season had turned a page. About halfway down the trail, I reached the old wooden footbridge. I leaned on the rail and looked down at the water. It moved gently over the rocks, slow and steady, not rushing toward anything, just flowing. I watched it for a long time. That's when I pulled out the little notebook I'd slipped into my coat pocket, the one with the faded cover, and the list titled Things I Still Want. I read it again, slowly this time, not with sadness, but with a kind of quiet affection, like looking at a photograph of who I used to be and realizing I didn't have to mourn her. I could invite her back. I took out a pen and added a new line at the bottom of the list. To never stop learning how to be alive. Then I smiled. With my eyes, this time. I was sure of it. I didn't realize I'd started humming until I passed an older couple on the trail, bundled up in matching jackets, the kind that probably came from one of those catalogs with oversized buttons and words like Easy Fit. The woman gave me a nod and said, "Nice day, isn't it?" "It really is," I replied, and I meant it. When I got back to the house, there was a message from my daughter. Mason had made me something in school and wanted to bring it over himself. He showed up that afternoon, backpack swinging behind him, cheeks red from the brisk air. "I made this," he said, holding out a folded piece of blue construction paper. "It's a happiness map." I opened it gently. Inside he'd drawn a stick figure version of me, gray hair, glasses, the whole thing, with stars and hearts around it. Underneath, in his shaky handwriting, were the words, "Grandma's smile is coming back." It's like magic. I knelt down and hugged him tight, trying not to let him see the tears welling up. He pulled back and looked at me with that same wide-eyed sincerity. "Are you happy now?" he asked. I paused, thinking carefully. "I think I'm learning how to be." "And that's something, isn't it?" He nodded, satisfied. "Okay, good." He ran off to find the cookies I'd made earlier, and I sat on the couch for a while, holding the happiness map in my lap like it was a treasure map. And maybe, in a way, it was. That evening, after he left, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to myself. Something I hadn't done in decades. "Dear me, you haven't been forgotten. You haven't disappeared. You've just been quiet. But you're still here. And you're worth waking up. Love, you." I folded it and placed it in the drawer with the photo albums and the old stories. I don't know when I'll need it again, but I know I'll find it when I do. So yes, my grandson's words were unexpected. Simple even. But they reached into the quiet parts of me and reminded me that it's never too late to feel joy again. Never too late to become someone new, or to remember who you've always been underneath the layers of life and loss and long days. If you're listening to this and you've been feeling like your smile doesn't quite reach your eyes anymore, I want you to know something. There's still time. There's still room. There's still a spark in you, even if you haven't felt it in a while. Sometimes it just takes one honest voice, one small moment, to wake it back up. And for me, that voice came from a 6-year-old with a plastic dinosaur and a heart full of light. Thank you for being here with me, listening to this story. If it touched something in you, please don't forget to like the video, share your own story in the comments. I really do read them. And subscribe so we can stay connected. Until next time, take care of yourself. And maybe smile with your eyes a little more today.